Thanks for joining me for this video today. I really hope you enjoyed the last one. So during that last one, we talked about why a difficult childhood, unfortunately, often leads to a life that feels difficult when you're an adult. And really, this is because we're products of our environment, and mainly because we develop coping strategies to cope with our early life. But those strategies often kind of hang around when we're adults. They're not particularly helpful. They're more suited to maybe our childhood environment, but not perhaps quite suited to what we want to do with our lives when we're older. So it leads to strategies like people pleasing, like maybe withdrawing when you feel overwhelmed, like trying to do everything, maybe bits of perfectionism in there. So we talked about that, and in the last video I also covered the fact that our childhood is when we're ideally meant to learn vital life skills. Life skills like how to have healthy relationships, how to take care of yourself, how to cope with stress, how to express yourself without worrying, all of that good stuff. But sometimes we just are not in an environment that facilitates that. So my brand new course, which is the Childhood Healing Method, is going to be a pre-recorded course, and it'll be released soon, and it really teaches and helps you to recover from a childhood that didn't really give you what you needed, and make sure that you can build a good life, a life that you want now without being affected by all of that stuff that's happened in the past. So in this video, I'm going to do a quick but deep dive into relationships. So everything that I talk about here in this video, and also in the healing method, in the childhood healing method, is all stuff that I've covered and used with thousands of psychotherapy clients over the years that I've had, all of whom have needed to recover from painful childhoods or traumatic childhoods. And really, they've all of those clients that I've used this information with and this method with, they've all needed to get to a place of acceptance because they didn't experience that sense of acceptance and safety as a child. It's also information that I have used personally, and I've used this to heal from my own childhood, my relationship with my mother, which she was narcissistic. It was an enmeshed and codependent relationship, and also healing from my relationship with my father, who was physically present but emotionally absent and distant. So both of those relationships have had an impact on me, and I've honed all of the techniques that I talk about in the childhood healing method, and also used all of the stuff we're going to talk about in a moment about relationships. I've used all of this stuff to heal, to grow, to move forward, and really to get to a place where I'm really not particularly affected by my childhood. Of course, it's still something that I can think about and draw on like any memory, but it's not something that bothers me or my day-to-day life at all. Now, it's pretty rare to escape a difficult childhood without having quite a mark left on your relationships and how you relate, because of what I mentioned earlier, these kind of strategies that we develop when we're children to cope with our environment and to cope with our relationships, to cope with our family relationships and other relationships. All of that stuff lingers, and then we can find ourselves in patterns like maybe we are unconsciously keeping people at bay. We're not wanting people to get too close. Perhaps we're not confident in our own boundaries, so people maybe take advantage. There's all sorts of dynamics that can set in. So what I want to do is talk now about the drama triangle, because this gives a really wonderful explanation. It's just a fantastic tool for understanding what might be happening in relationships, and especially in those tricky relationships, right? You know, in the relationships that you think something's going wrong, there's a lot of conflict, or it's just kind of difficult to enjoy each other, right? So let's have a think then. If you can see this, the diagram that's up on the screen now, there are these three roles: victim, persecutor, and rescuer. So all of these three roles, they create a dynamic. So what a dynamic is really is that it's the idea that what one person does in a relationship or in an interaction or a conversation is going to invite another or certain type of response, okay? So these dynamics, these three dynamics, victim, persecutor, rescuer, we'll talk about what they mean in just a moment, but they all play out in relationships kind of in synchronization with each other, okay? So, for instance, if someone is being persecutory in a conversation, so that means that they're being critical, maybe they're being aggressive, maybe they're being blaming in some way, then what that does is unconsciously pushes the other person into perhaps a mode of victim, for example. So there's this kind of unconscious invitation happening within this dynamic, okay? So this can also happen with, for instance, if somebody is in victim mode, okay? So they're, obviously I'm sure you know what that looks like, what that means, but they are communicating that they're not okay, that something's happened, that they can't cope, that they feel overwhelmed. What that might do is unconsciously invite the other person in that conversation or in that relationship to assume the role of rescuer, okay, to try to help, to try to problem solve, to try to make things better. Now we can every single person has embodied all of these positions at least once. None of these are defining. They don't define who you are or how you are. They're just roles that we play. So we can all embody all of these areas, and sometimes we can move between them in the same conversation. Sometimes it might also be the case though that we identify more with one area more dominantly, and that perhaps that was a way that we got our needs met early on. So for example, I used to very much identify with the role of rescuer. I developed a lot of kind of people-pleasing strategies when I was a child to try to manage my parental relationships mainly. But obviously then that became how I just managed my relationships in general, because that's what I became used to. So I used to really embody this role of rescuer. So what that would have been doing is unconsciously inviting people to perhaps go into victim mode with me, right? And they would have gone into the mode of kind of telling me their problems, of hello therapist. That's why I was drawn to therapy in the first place. Obviously I didn't have the awareness back then, but now I do. But you know, it's getting into that. I would have been inviting people into that role around me more, so therefore people would have been drawn to me at that time in order for me to be able to help them, okay, in order for me to be rescuing them. But of course this would have taken its toll. All of these roles take their toll. So if we go back to this drama triangle, then what I want you to just take a moment to do and to think about is just to think back to a recent difficult conversation, maybe an argument, maybe just a relationship that feels difficult for you. Could be your boss, your partner, sister, friend, whoever it is. And just take a moment to consider which part of the triangle they were kind of sitting in most in an interaction that you had with them that felt difficult. See if anything comes to mind. If it doesn't, then you can, you know, take your time and do this after the video ends, of course. I'll just give you a moment. So once you've done that, then maybe you can consider which part of the triangle you were maybe sitting in during that conversation, where you found yourself in relation to that person. What was happening for you? Did that feel familiar? Was it a position that actually you're not that familiar with or comfortable with? So it's just bringing awareness. And I love the drama triangle because it gives a really kind of straightforward way to understand complicated relationships. So there is a way to opt out of the drama triangle. Okay, so even if you really resonate with this, maybe you're thinking to yourself, wow, this is most of my relationships right now. Or maybe if you're just thinking, yeah, this is one of my main relationships I can really relate to with the drama triangle, but I don't know how to get out of it. So one thing I'll say is that obviously in a dynamic, there's more than one person. So you can only do what you can do. Of course, you can't change the other person. However, what we can think about now is this kind of opposite version of this triad. Okay, so the opposite of the drama triangle is being assertive, caring, and curious. So these roles, this role of being assertive, role of being caring, role of being curious. So the assertive piece is important because this is where you're holding your boundaries. This is where you're being you can be caring, you can be being kind in these interactions, but within your own boundaries. Okay, so that means that you're never going to be stepping over a line at which you are then foregoing yourself or betraying yourself. Okay, so that assertive piece is really important. The curious part is about encouraging you to be observing. Okay, so we're moving from this position in the drama triangle. There's loads of reactivity. We're reacting a lot to one another. There's all of these unconscious invitations flying around. When we're being curious, when we're being in a position of being observational instead, it's conscious, it's intentional, it's just seeing what happens, it's seeing what unfolds, it's just observing the other person instead of reacting to them. It's creating an environment of pausing, of slowing down. You know, when we're in a drama triangle where things are flying all around, it's quick. There's obviously a lot of the unconscious stuff happening. But when we're in this mode of observing, of being curious instead, then we're pausing. Maybe we're asking questions, maybe we're not. But these three roles instead, being assertive, being caring, being curious. And remember, caring can count for you as well, right? You're caring about yourself as well. All these three roles instead will really help you to just feel more in charge, to be more conscious. That's what we're wanting to do. When we're in the drama triangle, what we're doing is really we're repeating old dynamics. So if you recognize a drama triangle in yourself, then it's very likely that you're just repeating your childhood roles, childhood dynamics, childhood feelings. And what we want to do, and what I teach you in the childhood healing method, is a way to change those feelings, change the pull towards these dynamics so that they don't become familiar anymore. What becomes familiar instead is this new conscious way of relating to people, this new conscious way of showing up in your relationships. And really the childhood healing method is about reclaiming that part of you that was lost, reclaiming that part of you that became kind of covered up by these defensive roles, by these strategies, by these ways of getting your needs met that would have been really effective as a child, but maybe as an adult just aren't really kind of cutting it, or they're just really not working. So I hope that it was a useful breakdown of relationships, just a way to be thinking about what might be happening in your relationships. And there's plenty of these. That's just a really small example of some of the stuff that you'll be getting in the childhood healing method, because really one of the things that childhood trauma does is that it keeps us stuck. And what I want to do with the childhood healing method is to give you that sense of choice back, okay? That because sometimes when we're still living in survival mode, or we're still living out of our trauma responses, some choices, some decisions, some options just feel impossible to us. You know, if, for example, you're used to playing the role of rescuer, or people pleasing, you know, where you are constantly saying yes, you're adapting to other people, you're wanting to not make a fuss, you're wanting things to kind of go smoothly. if you're used to doing that, then even though it's tiring, even though it doesn't feel authentic, I know, I've been there, um, it's impossible sometimes to imagine another way. It takes away that choice in that moment. But what I want to do is give you back that choice to react and respond to people in a way that feels authentic in that moment, without fearing that you'll be rejected or abandoned or unliked. I don't want any of that stuff to feature so heavily anymore. You might also be stuck in things like cycles of perfectionism or burnout, and depression. All that stuff goes hand in hand, just because the weight of perfectionism is too much for anyone to bear. So then the body shuts down and goes into burnout or goes into withdrawing and depression instead. So the childhood healing method, really is about giving you the choice to live a life that you want, a choice that for you feels fulfilling, one that isn't ruled by ups and downs. So I would just want to spend a moment thinking about low self-esteem, because ultimately when we get used to looking outside of ourselves for approval, it makes us feel vulnerable. So if we get everything that we need from our parents when we're children, that doesn't mean it has to be perfect, but if we generally get from our family environment, from our parental relationships, if we get enough attention, we get enough approval, we get enough love, we get enough validation, then what it means is we kind of internalize all of that when we're children. And then we have a big pool of that to pull on when we're adults to offer to ourselves. And then we're likely to be operating most of the time within kind of healthy self-esteem realms generally. But if that hasn't happened, then what we tend to do is carry on, just as we would have as children. We carry on looking for that approval, that love, that validation, that acceptance from other people. So we kind of don't maybe switch over into doing it for ourselves, unless we consciously sit down and do this type of healing work that obviously I'm wanting to help you with in the childhood healing method. So I like to think of this, when I'm thinking about self-esteem, I like to compare it to the stock market, because when we're easily affected by what happens to us, what happens around us, when our mood dips because of a conversation, or it dips because of a certain event that's happened, then we're like the stock market. We're kind of up and down, up and down. We're very vulnerable to what people say, which we can't control. We're vulnerable to what people do, which we can't control. We're vulnerable to what happens, maybe in our professional life, what happens in our personal life, which, again, a lot of which we can't control. Obviously, we can have some input, but we can't control life. We can't control people. We can't control events. So if we're kind of dependent on our external world making us feel whole and complete and okay, then we're like the stock market. We're up and down, and it's unpredictable. It's an unpredictable way to experience life. And all of this is a childhood, or all of this kind of points to a childhood in which you kind of didn't quite get enough. What I want to help you do through the method is to become instead like the Rock of Gibraltar. So that's just like a huge rock, as you can imagine, the Rock of Gibraltar, and it is unaffected. It looks magnificent. It's strong. No matter what the weather, no matter what's happening around it, it stays as it is. It is unaffected by external events, of course. It's a big rock. It's rooted. It's grounded. And that's what I want for you, is to travel through life with that sense of being grounded and unaffected by the weather, unaffected by the emotional weather in your life. Really, healing childhood wounds means that you become in charge of your emotions. That doesn't mean we're controlling them, that's a really different thing, but you become in charge of your mood, your thoughts, your choices. It means that life becomes clearer, it becomes more conscious, instead of being ruled by all of these unconscious patterns, all of these kind of old events that you experienced, that stuff is still there. We can't change the past, but we can change how we feel about the past, and we can definitely change how much it impacts us. Now, you might well be thinking, Sean, like, too much has happened, basically. Too much has happened, or it was too long ago. It's not possible for me to get over the stuff that happened in the past. But I want to tell you, as someone that has done this personally, but also as someone who has helped so many people do this in my psychotherapy practice, it absolutely is possible. Healing from trauma is possible. If it wasn't, if I didn't believe that to be true, I would not be here. I would not be saying this. I would not be in this profession. It is absolutely possible. I remember I worked with a lady called Sarah. So she was about 42 when we worked together. She'd had a series of painful relationships with men who were unavailable. Her friendships were just kind of imbalanced, and she often felt quite taken advantage of. She tended to go through these bouts of depression or panic attacks. She'd kind of swing between the two, and she just generally felt kind of on edge. Small things felt really stressful for her. She also struggled for a long time to find a sense of purpose. People often talk about purpose, and she really struggled with that and generally just felt lost. And all of this, unsurprisingly, as it always does, it all related back to her childhood, and she'd had kind of unpredictable parenting. She didn't ever know quite what to expect. Her parents also fought a lot, which at the time she blamed herself for, which children always do. That's kind of how we're wired as children, is to self-blame. She also kind of got used to these patterns of withdrawing when things got too much, which led to her depression when she was older. And she was often just left with her own feelings a lot when she was younger, when she wasn't able to cope with them. And she was also very used to chaotic relationships because of her childhood. So that then kind of mapped across to finding her way to these relationships that weren't very kind of healthy for her. So using the same exact methods that I teach in the childhood healing method, we were able to change. She was able to really change how she showed up in relationships. So she no longer felt taken advantage of. Her boundaries got much better. She didn't feel so overlooked. So that part of her that was really quite traumatized by feeling kind of overpowered and feeling voiceless, feeling helpless, she managed to reclaim that lost power that she lost when she was really young. But she was able to reclaim that in her relationships now with healthier boundaries. And she also developed much better self-esteem, which was basically based on who she was rather than what she did, and rather than what she did for other people. She got to know herself properly for the first time ever, which is what she said, that she'd never kind of felt safe enough to take the time really to connect with who she is, what she wants to do. And that led to all sorts of things, a new career path for her that felt more meaningful, but all sorts of things that that she did using these same methods that I will talk you through, and that I've distilled basically everything that I would do with my clients like Sarah. I've distilled them all down into this course, and it's a self-paced course, which means so it's pre-recorded, so you do it in your own time, and that is very deliberate because there will be some bits that you might think, I kind of get this, or this, yeah, okay, this is good, I can whiz through it, and some bits where you need to take a bit more time, take a moment. So really the message I'm trying to get across, if nothing else, is that trauma can be healed. A difficult childhood does not have to mean a difficult adult life. And there is another option other than confusing relationships, or self-care that comes and goes, or being critical of yourself, or feeling kind of lost, feeling unable to to get a sense of what you want to do in life. There's another option, there's another way. We can do this work, do this childhood healing work, and it unravel. It will kind of emerge, everything will become easier. So the next video I'm going to send out is going to include a really interesting breakdown of how to actually heal. So how we do this. We've talked about, why it's so important, but the next video will talk about how you can actually do it. So don't miss out on that. That will be with you in a few days. And thanks so much for listening. Take care.